Charles Bukowski was a drunk and a gambler, by all standards a loser. Yet he became a sensation. How? Not by trying to be better, but by accepting he was a screw-up. This is the backwards law. Trying to be happy makes you miserable. Accepting your misery creates peace. It sounds crazy, right? But think about it. What if your constant desire for more is exactly what makes you feel like less? What if the key to a good life isn't caring about more things, but caring about fewer, better things? This summary of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F*ck by Mark Manson challenges the obsession with constant positivity. It argues that life is defined not by what we enjoy, but by what we are willing to suffer for. By embracing our limitations, taking radical responsibility for our reactions, and confronting the reality of death, we can stop sweating the trivial details. It is a guide to finding meaning through struggle and choosing better values, proving that true freedom comes from knowing exactly what to care about and letting the rest go. Ready to go deeper? Here's the extended summary of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F-word. Charles Bukowski was a drunk, a womanizer, and a chronic gambler. By all conventional standards, he was a loser. Yet, late in life, he became a literary sensation. The interesting thing isn't just that he succeeded, but how he did it. He didn't suddenly become a model citizen or a beacon of positivity. He succeeded because he knew exactly who he was. A screw-up, and he didn't try to hide it. In fact, the epitaph on his tombstone reads simply, "Don't try." This advice runs contrary to almost everything we hear in modern society. We are constantly bombarded with messages telling us to be happier, healthier, and richer. But this constant pressure to be more actually highlights what we lack. It reinforces the feeling that we aren't enough. Think about it. A truly happy person doesn't need to stand in front of a mirror and tell themselves they're happy. They just are. This brings us to a concept called the backwards law, popularized by philosopher Alan Watts. The idea is simple but counterintuitive. The desire for a more positive experience is itself a negative experience. Paradoxically, the acceptance of one's negative experience is itself a positive experience. When you try too hard to be happy, you become miserable because you're constantly aware of your unhappiness. But when you accept that life is sometimes difficult, you stop fighting it, and that acceptance brings a kind of peace. Unfortunately, most people get stuck in what we can call the feedback loop from hell. You get anxious about something, and then you start worrying about the fact that you're anxious. Now you're anxious about being anxious, it spirals. Modern culture, with its curated social media feeds, makes this worse by convincing us that everyone else is having an amazing life while we are struggling. We feel like something is wrong with us for feeling bad. The solution is to stop caring so much about the negative emotions. If you feel terrible, just admit it. Say to yourself, "I feel like garbage, but who cares?" By refusing to judge your own suffering, you short-circuit the feedback loop. You stop hating yourself for feeling bad. This is the core of the subtle art of not giving a fuck. It is not about being indifferent or having no emotions. Indifference is actually a sign of fear, a way to hide from the world. True freedom comes from being comfortable with being different and comfortable with adversity. It means you choose to care about something important, like your values, your family, or your craft, so that the trivial problems of life don't bother you. To not care about adversity, you must care about something more important than that adversity. If you don't have a central purpose, your mind will invent problems to fill the void. Maturity is simply the process of becoming more selective about what deserves your energy. You have a limited amount of fucks to give, so you must spend them wisely. To understand why this prioritization is so vital, we have to look at the nature of suffering itself. Consider the story of a young prince who was raised in total isolation. His father, the king, wanted to shield him from all pain, so the prince lived in a palace surrounded by luxury, unaware of sickness or death. But despite having everything, the prince felt empty. He eventually snuck out into the world and was horrified to see the reality of human suffering, poverty, disease, and old age. This prince, who would later become the Buddha, initially reacted by swinging to the opposite extreme. He gave up his wealth and lived in dirt, starving himself, thinking that suffering was the point. But after years of this, he realized that extreme self-denial was just as meaningless as extreme luxury. His great insight was that suffering is inherent to existence. You cannot escape it. You can only change how you relate to it. This realization challenges the way most of us view happiness. We tend to see happiness as an algorithm, a solvable equation, where if we just achieve specific conditions, like the right job, the right partner, or enough money, we will be permanently satisfied. But human biology doesn't work that way. We are evolved to feel a certain degree of dissatisfaction and insecurity. These feelings aren't bugs in the system. They are features that keep us alive and drive us to innovate. Imagine a metaphorical superhero named Disappointment Panda. His superpower is telling you the harsh truths you refuse to admit to yourself, and he would likely tell you that suffering is biologically useful. It is nature's preferred agent for inspiring change. Just as physical pain teaches a child not to touch a hot stove, psychological pain, like the sting of rejection, the anxiety of failure, or the ache of heartbreak, is a feedback mechanism. It signals that something is out of balance, or that we have exceeded our limits. If we try to numb ourselves to all discomfort, we disconnect from reality and lose the ability to learn these vital lessons. Because of this mechanism, problems never truly stop. They just get exchanged or upgraded. A millionaire has problems just like a person struggling with poverty does. The millionaire's problems are simply better problems to have. Therefore, happiness does not come from the absence of problems. It comes from the act of solving them. It is an active process, not a passive destination. The joy is found in the climb itself, not in sitting idly at the summit. Unfortunately, many people sabotage this process. They often fall into denial, distracting themselves to pretend their problems don't exist, or they adopt a victim mentality, believing they are powerless to change their circumstances. Both strategies provide a temporary emotional high, a fleeting relief from the pressure, but they prevent the hard work of actually solving the issue. This leads to a shallow existence dependent on external validation or constant distraction. To find genuine fulfillment, we have to flip the script on how we choose our goals. Most people ask themselves, "What do I want to enjoy?" They answer with the easy stuff: happiness, wealth, a perfect relationship. But that question is almost meaningless because everyone wants the result. The more interesting question, the one that actually determines your trajectory, is: what pain do you want in your life? What are you willing to struggle for? Consider the common fantasy of being a rock star. You might imagine the screaming crowds and the fame, but are you in love with the process? Are you willing to endure the grueling tour schedules, the heavy lifting of gear, the complex logistics, and the years of playing to empty rooms? If you only want the reward and not the struggle, you don't really want the goal. You just like the idea of it. Everything worthwhile involves a cost. The quality of your life is not determined by the quality of your positive experiences, but by the quality of your negative ones. It is defined by what you are willing to suffer for. True happiness occurs only when you find the problems you enjoy having and enjoy solving. True self-worth is defined by how we face our negative experiences. It involves looking frankly at our own flaws, our irresponsibility, our tendency to exaggerate, and actively working to improve them. In contrast, entitled people refuse to acknowledge these issues. They get stuck in a cycle of denial, chasing superficial highs until reality forces a crash. The author shares a stark example from his own life. At 13, he was a rebellious kid who had cut a secret compartment into his backpack to hide marijuana. When he was caught at school, the consequences were severe: expulsion, loss of friends, and family turmoil. But the real trauma wasn't just the event, it was the silence that followed. His family practiced stonewalling, a communication style where difficult truths were ignored. This avoidance taught him that problems were unsolvable, fostering a sense of helplessness that fueled his own entitlement. Entitlement often stems from this belief that your problems are unique. It manifests in two ways. One is the arrogance of thinking, "I'm awesome and you all suck, so I deserve special treatment." But the other is just as dangerous. "I'm broken and you all are perfect, so I deserve special treatment." Whether you feel uniquely superior or uniquely defective, the result is the same. You separate yourself from others and refuse to accept the ordinary struggles of life. Modern culture amplifies this through the tyranny of exceptionalism. We are flooded with media showcasing the extreme best and the extreme worst of human experience. This makes the vast middle, where life actually happens, feel like failure, We start believing that if we aren't extraordinary, we don't matter. But emotional health comes from accepting a bland truth. You are not special. Most of your life will be average, and that is okay. Accepting this relieves the pressure to be amazing and allows you to appreciate simple, meaningful things. This brings us to the question of why we suffer. Consider Hiroo Onoda, the Japanese soldier who spent 30 years fighting a guerrilla war in the Philippines after World War II ended, refusing to believe the war was over. He suffered immensely, yet he felt no regret, because his suffering had a clear purpose: loyalty. It was only when he returned to a consumerist Japan that he felt despair. His suffering had lost its meaning. To understand our own suffering, we must peel back the layers of the self-awareness onion. The first layer is simply knowing what you feel. The second is understanding why you feel it. But the third and most crucial layer asks, why do I consider this a success or a failure? How am I choosing to measure myself? Our values determine the nature of our problems. If you measure your relationship with your brother solely by how often he texts you, you might feel like a failure when the phone doesn't buzz. But if you change the metric to mutual respect or trust, the problem shifts entirely. We cannot avoid problems, but we can control what they mean by choosing the standards we use to measure them. The objective reality matters less than the value we assign to it. Consider the story of Dave Mustaine. In 1983, he was kicked out of a band that would go on to become Metallica. Fueled by rage and ambition, Mustaine formed his own group, Megadeth, which became a massive success in its own right, selling millions of albums and touring the world. Yet, decades later, in a tearful interview, Mustaine admitted he still felt like a failure. Why? Because his chosen metric for success was to be more popular than Metallica. Since they were the biggest metal band in history, he doomed himself to perpetual dissatisfaction, despite objectively achieving what most musicians only dream of. Now compare him to Pete Best, the original drummer for the Beatles, who was also fired just before the band hit stardom. He watched from the sidelines as his former bandmates became the most famous people on Earth. But later in life, Best said he was happier than he would have been with the Beatles. He had changed his values. He stopped measuring himself by fame and started measuring success by his loving family and a stable life. Both men experienced the same rejection, but their chosen metrics dictated whether that event became a tragedy or a turning point. This brings us to a critical distinction. Some values are simply better than others. Shitty values, as the author calls them, are generally reliant on external events. Take pleasure, for example. It is a false god. Research shows that chasing pleasure for its own sake often leads to anxiety and depression. Similarly, material success and the need to always be right are poor metrics because they are often out of our control or prevent us from learning. Even staying positive can be a bad value if it becomes a form of avoidance, denying the negative emotions that provide us with crucial feedback. Good values, on the other hand, are reality-based, socially constructive, and immediate. Qualities like honesty, curiosity, and humility are controllable. You can choose to be honest right now, regardless of your external circumstances. When we prioritize good values, we don't eliminate problems, but we get better problems, ones that can be solved and that add meaning to our lives. This shift requires what the book calls radical responsibility. We must accept that we are responsible for everything in our lives, no matter the external circumstances. This does not mean everything is your fault. There is a major difference between fault and responsibility. Fault is past tense. It is about who caused the situation. Responsibility is present tense. It is about who chooses how to react to it. If someone leaves a baby on your doorstep, it is certainly not your fault. You didn't put it there. But it is now your responsibility. You must choose what to do next. You cannot wait for the person at fault to come back and fix it. This principle saved the life of William James. Born into privilege but plagued by illness and failure, James fell into a deep depression. He decided to conduct an experiment. For 1 year, he would believe he was 100% responsible for everything in his life. He would stop blaming his health or his father's disapproval and focus entirely on his own choices. That shift transformed him from a suicidal dropout into the father of American psychology. We do not always control what happens to us, But we always control how we interpret what happens to us and how we respond. As the author puts it, with great responsibility comes great power. The more responsibility you accept for your reactions and your values, the more power you gain over your own happiness. It is crucial to understand that taking responsibility is not the same as accepting fault. These are two different concepts that often get confused. Fault is about the past. It is the result of choices that have already been made. Responsibility is about the present. It is the result of the choices you are making right now. If someone leaves a newborn baby on your doorstep, it is certainly not your fault. You didn't put the baby there. But the moment you open that door, the situation becomes your responsibility. You must choose what to do next. Similarly, if you are robbed or struck by a tragedy, the event itself is not your fault, but managing the emotional and practical fallout is entirely your responsibility. Nobody else can process your emotions for you. The author learned this distinction through a painful breakup. Initially, he blamed his ex-girlfriend for his misery, focusing entirely on her actions. But eventually, he realized that while she was to blame for how she ended things, he was responsible for his own emotional recovery. This shift allowed him to stop stewing in resentment and start improving his life through exercise and travel. Later, he even recognized his own faults in the relationship, acknowledging that he hadn't been a perfect partner either. By taking ownership, he transformed a painful event into a lesson on how to make better choices in the future. This logic applies even to the circumstances we are born into. Think of life like a game of poker. You do not get to choose your cards. Some people are dealt a straight flush, while others are stuck with a pair of twos. It is not your fault if you receive a bad hand, whether that is a genetic disposition or a disadvantaged background. But it is entirely your responsibility how you play that hand. The best players aren't necessarily the ones with the best cards. They are the ones who make the best choices with the cards they hold. Unfortunately, modern society often encourages the opposite approach. We see a rise in what the author calls victimhood chic. Social media rewards us for sharing our grievances, offering a temporary high of moral righteousness when we blame others for our problems. This outrage porn feels good in the moment, but it is addictive and ultimately hollow. It distracts us from the difficult work of managing our own reactions and values. That work is difficult because changing our values requires us to admit that we might be wrong. In fact, the author suggests a humbling premise: you are wrong about everything. Or at least, you are not quite right. Growth is not about finding the ultimate truth. It is about becoming slightly less wrong over time. Our brains are meaning machines that desperately try to find patterns, often inventing connections where none exist. We cling to these beliefs because certainty feels safe. However, certainty is the enemy of growth. If you believe you already know the truth about yourself and the world, you stop looking for improvements. To truly move forward, we must be willing to doubt our own certainties and treat our beliefs as hypotheses to be tested, rather than truths to be defended. This drive for certainty stems from the fact that our brains are essentially meaning machines. In psychological experiments where participants receive random rewards, they often invent elaborate rituals, like hopping on one foot or tapping the ceiling, convinced that these specific actions are earning them points. We are constantly connecting dots that don't actually connect, desperate to impose order on chaos. This flaw extends deeply into our memories. We tend to view memory as a reliable video recording, but it functions more like a game of telephone. Every time we recall an event, we edit it to fit our current feelings and beliefs. If a relationship turns sour today, our brains will rewrite the past to make the partner seem like a villain all along, ensuring our personal narrative remains consistent. Consider the story of Meredith Moran. During a turbulent period in her life, she began to recover memories of childhood abuse. These revelations destroyed her relationship with her father and split her family. Years later, however, she realized these memories were entirely false, invented by her mind to explain her present-day struggles. Her brain had prioritized narrative coherence over factual truth. This phenomenon reveals a frightening reality. Our beliefs are malleable, and our memories are often unreliable. When we ignore this fallibility and cling to certainty, the results can be dangerous. Research by psychologist Roy Baumeister suggests that evil is rarely the result of low self-esteem. Instead, violence and cruelty often stem from an unshakable certainty in one's own righteousness. When people feel morally superior and absolutely certain, they feel justified in punishing others. Paradoxically, the pursuit of certainty also breeds personal insecurity. The more you desperately need to know the absolute truth about your partner's loyalty or your standing at work, the more jealous, paranoid, and insecure you become. The alternative is to embrace uncertainty. Admitting "I don't know" is liberating. It removes the pressure to judge everyone, including yourself. But this is difficult because of what the author calls Manson's law of avoidance. The more something threatens your identity, the more you will avoid it. We fear changing our circumstances, even for the better, because change threatens our concept of who we are. A person who identifies strongly as a starving artist might subconsciously sabotage their own financial success because becoming wealthy would destroy their identity. To counter this, the author advises us to never know who you are. Keep your identity small and broad. Define yourself as a partner, a student, or a friend, rather than attaching yourself to rigid, grandiose labels. This flexibility allows you to grow without feeling like you are losing yourself. To practice this, we must constantly ask ourselves 3 hard questions. First, what if I'm wrong? We are often the last to realize when we are being angry, jealous, or unreasonable. Second, what would it mean if I were wrong? This forces us to confront the painful possibility that our values or assumptions are flawed. As Aristotle noted, the mark of an educated mind is the ability to entertain a thought without accepting it. By questioning our own narratives, we open the door to genuine change. Finally, we must ask the third and most practical question. Would being wrong create a better or worse problem than my current problem, for both myself and others? This serves as a litmus test for our values. Often, the path of self-righteousness, proving we are right, feels good in the moment, but creates long-term misery and conflict. The alternative, admitting we might be wrong, is uncomfortable in the short term, but usually leads to humility, resolution, and growth. The author suggests a simple rule of thumb. If a conflict comes down to me being screwed up versus everyone else being screwed up, it is far more likely that I am the one who is screwed up. This humility opens the door to a broader concept. Failure is the way forward. We often try to avoid failure at all costs, but improvement is actually built upon thousands of tiny failures. Consider the story of Picasso, who, when asked how he created a sketch in mere minutes, replied that it had taken him over 60 years. His mastery was simply a culmination of endless experimentation. The magnitude of your success is based on how many times you failed at something. If someone is better than you at something, it's likely because they've failed at it more than you have. The fear of failure usually stems from choosing the wrong values. If your value is, make everyone I meet like me, your self-worth is entirely dependent on external reactions you can't control. This makes every interaction a high-stakes gamble. But if your value is, improve my social life, then an awkward conversation isn't a disaster. It's just a necessary step in the process. This process inevitably involves pain, which is crucial for psychological development. Just as physical pain tears muscle fibers to build them back stronger, emotional pain builds resilience and character. Research on trauma survivors has shown that many credit their suffering with making them better, more responsible people. Attempting to numb this pain with delusional positive thinking only robs us of the motivation to change. Sometimes, however, we know exactly what we need to do, but we are paralyzed by the emotional weight of the task. The author calls these VCR questions problems that look complicated from the inside but have simple answers from the outside. Like, how do I break up with my partner? Or, how do I quit my job? The answer is simple, you just do it. The problem is that doing it feels terrifying. To overcome this paralysis, we must adopt the do something principle. Most people believe that inspiration leads to motivation, which then leads to action. But this is a loop, not a straight line. Action is also the cause of motivation. If you lack the drive to make a change, do not wait for inspiration. Just do something, anything small, and let the reaction to that action motivate you further. As the author's math teacher used to say, if you're stuck on a problem, don't sit there and think about it, just start working on it. This bias toward action eventually led the author to reevaluate his own lifestyle of absolute freedom. After years of traveling to 55 countries, he realized that breadth of experience does not equal depth of meaning. Absolute freedom by itself means nothing. Meaning comes from what you choose to give up freedom for, commitment to a place, a belief, or a person. This lesson was hammered home during a trip to Russia, where the author encountered a culture of blunt honesty. Unlike the West, where politeness often masks truth to maintain social comfort, the Russian cultural norm, forged in an era where trust was a matter of survival, was to speak unvarnished truths. This initially felt like an attack, but the author soon recognized it as a form of liberation, the freedom to express oneself without the exhausting labor of constant likability. A Russian teacher once explained the root of this cultural difference to the author. Under communism, mutual trust was a matter of physical survival, so unvarnished honesty was non-negotiable. In the Free West, however, economic opportunity turned social interactions into transactions. Success often depends on salesmanship, on presenting a shiny, likable exterior to close a deal or win a promotion. But when we constantly reconfigure our personalities to be liked, we sacrifice intimacy. We make trust uncertain, because no one knows what is real and what is performance. This insight leads to a counterintuitive principle. Rejection actually makes life better. We often believe we should be universally accepting, saying yes to everything and everyone. But a life without rejection is a life without values. To value something means you must reject what is not that thing. If you value honesty, you must reject deception. If you value a specific path, you must reject the alternatives. Identity is defined as much by what we refuse as by what we accept. Avoiding rejection is often just a subtle form of entitlement, a desire to feel good all the time without standing for anything. This dynamic is nowhere more obvious than in our romantic lives. Modern culture tends to glorify dramatic, volatile love, the kind Shakespeare actually satirized in Romeo and Juliet. We mistake that intense, batshit crazy emotional high for true passion, but it is often just a lack of boundaries. Healthy love is different. It relies on a clear delineation of responsibility. In a healthy relationship, you are responsible for your own emotions and problems, and your partner is responsible for theirs. You support each other, but you do not save each other. Toxic relationships blur this line. You often see victims who expect others to fix their problems pairing up with savers who feel compelled to fix everyone else. They fit together like puzzle pieces, but the picture they form is one of codependency, not love. True intimacy requires the ability to say no and hear no without the relationship collapsing. If you cannot reject your partner, or if you cannot handle being rejected by them over small disagreements, the relationship is conditional. It is based on managing emotions rather than genuine connection. This logic extends beyond romance to how we structure our entire lives. We currently suffer from the, quote, paradox of choice. We assume that having infinite options is the definition of freedom, but it often leads to anxiety and a lack of satisfaction. We keep our options open to avoid missing out, but in doing so, we miss out on the only thing that matters: depth. The author discovered that true liberation came not from traveling to the 56th country, but from narrowing his focus, committing to one person, one craft, and one community. Breadth is just a stamp in a passport. Depth is where the gold is buried. Finally, nothing clarifies these values like the awareness of our own mortality. The author's perspective shifted radically after the death of his friend Josh at age 19. The tragedy plunged him into a deep depression that culminated in a stark realization. If death is inevitable, there is no reason to live in fear, embarrassment, or shame. Avoiding pain is avoiding being alive. Death is not just a tragedy to be feared, it is the light by which we measure the shadow of all life's meaning. It forces us to stop asking what we want to enjoy and start asking what matters enough to suffer for. This understanding aligns perfectly with the work of Ernest Becker, a rebellious academic who spent his life studying what drives human behavior. Becker was an intellectual outcast, frequently fired for his unconventional teaching style and refusal to play by university rules. Yet, while battling terminal cancer, he wrote a Pulitzer-winning book called The Denial of Death, which offers a profound framework for understanding our existential anxiety. Becker argued that humans are unique because we are the only animals capable of conceptualizing our own existence, and consequently, our own inevitable non-existence. We know we are going to die. This knowledge creates a background hum of death terror that influences everything we do. To cope, we develop two selves. First, there is the physical self, the body that eats, sleeps, and eventually decays. Second, there is the conceptual self, our identity, our reputation, and how we see ourselves. Because we cannot save the physical self, we become obsessed with saving the conceptual self. We engage in what Becker called immortality projects. We try to put our names on buildings, create great art, raise successful children, or conquer nations, all in a desperate attempt to ensure that some part of us lives forever. Becker suggested that human civilization itself is essentially a collection of these immortality projects. However, on his deathbed, he came to a startling conclusion. These projects are not the solution. They are the problem. They fuel our wars, our bigotry, and our anxiety. The only true freedom, he argued, lies in the bitter antidote, accepting that we are temporary and that our conceptual self will die just like our physical body. The author explores this visceral reality by describing a moment at the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. He walked toward the edge of a massive cliff, deliberately testing his own radar for death. At 10 feet away, he felt tension. At 5 feet, his mind began visualizing the fall. At 3 feet, his limbs shook, and an invisible magnet seemed to pull him back to safety. Yet, in that terrifying proximity to destruction, he found a strange, blinding euphoria. By staring into the abyss, the trivial worries of daily life evaporated. This is the paradox that ancient Stoics and Buddhists have taught for centuries. Keeping death in mind doesn't make life depressing. It makes it urgent and meaningful. As Mark Twain observed, the fear of death follows from the fear of life. A man who lives fully is prepared to die at any time. Confronting our mortality destroys entitlement. Entitlement whispers that we are the center of the universe, that we deserve greatness without struggle, and that our problems are unique. Death silences that voice. It reminds us that we are merely a contributing component in a much larger entity. It forces us to ask the most important question of all: what is your legacy? When we stop trying to be the center of the world and start caring about something greater than ourselves, the heavy burden of proving our worth disappears. We realize there is nothing to be afraid of. By peering into the darkness, life gets brighter, leaving us feeling not just safe, but truly, vividly alive.
I hope you enjoyed this summary of the book. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps a lot. And if the summary caught your interest, you can find a link in the description to buy the full book and dive deeper into its ideas. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Did you like this format? What would you change or improve for future summaries? See you in the next video.